Guys, welcome to the Fireside Bears YouTube channel. You can follow us on Twitter, YouTube, Facebook, TikTok, and Instagram at Fireside Bears. Usayd and Max Smith here. You can check us out on Twitter at Usayd at Max Smith ESM. Max, hope you had a great Thanksgiving. I know you were traveling. I hope everyone else had a safe and happy Thanksgiving and a healthy one too. But how you doing, man?
I'm doing good. I'm here. I had a great Thanksgiving. Like you just said, I hope everyone else had a great Thanksgiving. Good opportunity to be with your family. I hope everyone's doing well. Things are finally starting to swing back to normal, which is fantastic. And the one thing that hasn't changed throughout this entire pandemic has been Chicago Bears football being the most boring thing you could possibly watch on any given football day. Typically, it's a Sunday, but we were blessed, I guess, with having the Bears play on Thanksgiving. Now, I had the fortunate distinction of going to a Lions household. My girlfriend family is from Michigan, and they're Lions fans. I say fans with quotation marks because, they say that they're a Lions group, but they rarely ever watch football unless it's Thanksgiving. Lions fans will understand. And the opportunity to sit there and watch a game that the Bears shouldn't have won, and for them to get excited only to have their hopes crushed that they were going to win a game this season against a team that they should have beaten was a little disappointing, to say the least. But as a Bears fan, it did feel good to finally get in the win column for the first time in well over a month at this point. So this is a good opportunity for the Bears. They snapped their losing streak. And now, as Matt Nagy said, they're feeling like they're 1-0. When really, they're 4-7. So that's kind of a cheapskate. But anyways, I'm feeling all right. But we have a lot to talk about. We're going to jump into this Lions game, whatever that mess was. Bears barely pull away with the last second, I guess, with no seconds left on the clock, field goal. We're going to talk about how the younger guys kind of pushed this win to happen. They literally forced this win. A lot of the veterans didn't really seem to want to play at all. The younger guys kind of pushed everyone along the way and make sure that we could snap that losing streak. We're going to look at Artie Burns, stepped in for Kendall Vilder, who is clearly benched after his performance against the Ravens. And then we're going to talk about the GM coaching carousel a little bit. Ryan Pace's future with Chicago. There's some rumors that he's going to be fired. He's going to be reassigned. Usayd's got some good knowledge, some good breakdown. We'll talk about just what makes sense for Ryan Pace in the future here. But let's start off with the top Lions game. Shoot your initial reactions.
Well, you're right. It wasn't a game the Bears should have won. Now, when you go back and you look at the box score quarter by quarter, I mean, Detroit played like the better team at points. They actually were the only team to score in the first quarter. The Bears rallied off 13 unanswered points in the second quarter, which is always good because you want to see those kind of bits and pieces come together. I mean, as Bears writers and analysts, we've been saying this year after year after year since the Matt Nagy era. We've wanted to see an offense that's consistently able to put up points. The Bears did that in the second quarter. Now, the problem comes in is that anytime the Bears have had any sort of quote-unquote offensive explosion under Matt Nagy, like scoring 13 points in the second quarter, like this game, what happens is the quarter after that is usually just followed by a scoreless quarter. And then some way, somehow, if the Bears are lucky, they get to score a touchdown or a field goal in there. But the reason I bring that up is because the numbers show one thing. The numbers show that the Bears should have won this game by far. Now, you look at this, even though they may not necessarily have been the team that was playing harder out there on the field. The Bears had 18 first downs. They had 69 total plays. They had nearly about 378 total yards of offense. The Bears were averaging, 5.5 yards per play. Then you look at just time of possession too. I mean, time of possession, I think, is interesting because the Bears had the ball for just under 33 minutes, right? And then you look at in terms of turnovers too, the Bears had just the one turnover, okay? This was all, and by the way, penalties is a big one. The Bears had just 5 penalties per 50 yards. And I think there was also a point where the game reached the 2-minute warning in the first half, and the Bears magically had all 3 of their timeouts. So there were a couple positive things to build on. But I also think that the issue comes in the sense that, and we'll get to more positive stuff here in just a second. The issue comes in the sense that the Bears have the better roster than the Lions by far, okay? Both on paper and on the field. I know there was no Khalil Mack or Allen Robinson or Akeem Hicks in this game, but at the end of the day, if you're a team that's on the rise, you need to be able to beat teams consistently and beat bad teams consistently. You look at the Lions right now, they're in year one of a 6-year rebuild because they have Brad Holmes and Dan Campbell under contract for the next basically 6 seasons. The Bears should not have let the Lions even score at all in this game. Now, I am going to say this much. I think that when you look at this game overall, it pretty much confirmed one thing. It confirmed that the Bears are good against the bad teams and the average teams, but they are bad against the really good teams. And that's not a formula for success in the NFL because that type of formula cancels itself out. Because now what you are is this is if you can beat a team like Detroit that's going to have a top 5 or top 3 pick next season in the 2022 NFL draft, what's going to happen is this. But you can't beat a team like a Tampa Bay or a Green Bay or a LA Rams team. At the end of the day, guess what? I hate to break it to you. You're just the middle of the pack team, and that's all the Bears are right now. And this doesn't even, and I think that even with Justin Fields on the roster, because of decisions that have been made and because of bad coaching and execution, the Bears could hire another bad coach and nothing would change.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, there's a lot that I look at when I see this game and we look at the box score. There's a lot to take away. It's hard to imagine a team throwing 310 passing yards and only putting 16 points up on the board. It's hard to imagine a team, like you mentioned, holding the ball for 32 minutes in a game and only putting up 16 points on the board. It's hard to imagine an offense that's only sacked once and a team that only has 5 penalties throughout the entire game, only put up 16 points. It makes no sense to me, right? There's this missing piece of an equation in this offense that's been the entire standard for the Matt Nagy era, that points just aren't there. You'll have every facet of an offense that needs to be there minus the points. And it doesn't matter how many yards you throw for. It doesn't matter how many 100+ rushing games your running back has. None of that stuff matters as long as you don't put points in the end zone, right? I mean, we talk about the Bears could have 2 extra wins on their belt right now. By all means, the Bears should be at or above 500 because of the games that we should have won, right? And there's a lot of ifs going around. If the defense was able to stop the Ravens, if the defense was able to stop the Steelers, right? Those are games that the Bears prove that they could have won, but there's just that lack. There's 1 or 2 elements of the equation that just aren't there week in and week out. And it's becoming frustrating because it's been multiple years of this now. But I couldn't even imagine being the players on the sidelines knowing that I'm putting everything I have into this game only for one thing to be missing. And that comes down to execution and game planning, right? You spend your entire week preparing to make sure that every corner is covered. And good teams are able to do that. What I think is incredibly fascinating about the Lions is they have a good coaching staff. I'll write that until the cows come home. By zero means, and we've been saying this all season on this channel, by zero means should the Lions be winless, right? But they are. It's just the reality of the NFL. You could have a good team on paper. You could have a good coaching staff on paper. But guess what? If you don't win games, you don't win games, right? If they don't work together, they don't work together. But what's so fascinating is Matt Nagy outcoached Dan Campbell, right? The Bears were able to outcoach the Lions, which isn't a great thing to say. Like, that's not like a great bar, but I do have respect for Dan Campbell and his coaching staff because they do motivate their players to play incredibly tough, incredibly hard, but haven't won a single game. Teams at this point in the season that are 0-11 usually don't even put up a fight. But the fact that the Lions are putting up fights consistently tells you just how much they're bought into that message in that 6-year future, many of whom players won't even be there next year or the year after under Campbell's regime. Now, what that says is, well, Matt Nagy had a bit of a bounce back, right? But it's clear that the players aren't entirely sold. I think there's still some rifts in the locker room that's pretty evident by play out on the field. Of course, we had some players like Tashawn Gibson come out and say, oh, no, we love playing for Matt Nagy. But there's one thing saying it in the locker room before a game. There's one thing seeing it on the field, seeing body language, all that jazz. And it's really easy to speculate, but I'm just saying there's zero reason a team should be moving the ball this well without putting this many points up on the board. Sorry, only putting 16 points up on the board.
Well, you talk about moving the ball. I mean, let's talk about that for a second here because what were the issues I mean, throw 2018 out the window for a second, because when you look at 2018, it was the definition. The 2018 Bears team, let me put it this way: the 2018 Bears were a defense first team that played quote unquote complementary football to give the offense short field. That was kind of old school football, right? And that's the reason so many of us really enjoyed just watching games that season and covering the Bears too. But the bigger issue comes down to this, is that when you look at 2019 and 2020, what were the two main issues? One, couldn't move the ball efficiently at all. Two, couldn't put up points efficiently at all. Now, I bring those issues up because what's happening in 2021, you are seeing more and more that the Bears are able to move the ball to some degree of efficiency. The problem comes in where the execution's lacking. And when you break the execution factor down, the Bears can't finish and sustain drives. This 8 minute, the last play, I'm sorry, the last drive of the game against the Lions, what happened? It was a drive that took off like 8.5 minutes on the clock. When's the last time you had a drive that took off 8 minutes and 30 seconds on the clock? Which, speaking of that, by the way, in time of possession, the Bears also went through a phase where they pretty much did not, from 14:55 in the second quarter all the way to like midway through the third quarter, David Montgomery wasn't handed the ball. I don't know what was up there. I just think that this team fails to make adjustments at the half when it comes to being able to get the running game going. So ultimately, you look at this and you say, okay, 2019, 2020, the Bears weren't able to do anything. 2021, you are at least seeing positive steps in the right direction. But at the end of the day, even those positive steps in terms of being able to move the ball efficiently and effectively, it is still too little too late, because you're thinking of this right now. What if this could have been done against the Steelers in the first half, against the Ravens consistently in the first half, against the 49ers? The Bears are just a team where it seems like, I shouldn't even say it seems like, but they're a team where they need to beg and scratch and claw their way to fight for every single yard. They can't move the ball with ease.
Yeah, and I think what we need to do is we need to talk about Andy Dalton for a quick second. Coming off of his first win, in a while, off the bench against the Ravens, put us in a situation to win the game, won the game for us against the Lions, right? There's something to be said about how this offense is operated under the game and a half that we've seen with Andy Dalton versus the past sample that we have of Justin Fields. We saw a lot of screens against the Lions, which is something that we barely saw with Justin Fields, correct? We noticeably saw, again, a complete lack of QB runs, which is not surprising at all. But I noticed a lot more gun and empty set motion, right? And then what I also noticed a lot was Andy Dalton changing the plays on the line. That's something that we didn't see with Justin Fields, mostly because he's a rookie. He's not used to reading defenses. But even that half that Andy was playing against the Ravens, he was consistently changing things on the line. He was calling audibles. He was changing protections. He was potentially changing some routes. He was canning a lot of plays. So there's something that's interesting there, because we haven't seen that since Nick Foles was taking snaps on that offense as well. There's something interesting. And again, I could be reading just too much into this, but when you have two consistent veteran quarterbacks who have been on successful offenses that have done incredibly well in their career, continuously change plays at the line, play after play after play, it makes me wonder, are they just not happy with the plays that are coming into their helmet? Or is this some sort of grand, old quarterback captain, field captain stratagem? I tend to think that it's the former. I think that they just don't like some of the plays that are coming down. They don't like the read. They don't like the look. So let's make a quick adjustment here or there. For a couple examples is anytime that Andy Dalton would audible, it usually wasn't into a run. It was usually into some sort of short route to Cole Kmet. Cole Kmet got 8 receptions this game, which is something that we haven't seen volumes of production in Cole Kmet since, again, around this time last season. For some reason, Cole Kmet always does better in the second half of the season than in the first half of the season. But Andy Dalton was trying to get Cole Kmet the ball. That much is very clear. Andy Dalton was also trying to get Damiere Byrd the ball. That much is very clear. But it didn't seem like those were the intended routes for Matt Nagy's. You have 3 seconds for the route to develop. Hit it the second it's developed, or else the play is dead. Patented offense. It seemed like, let me call some sort of audible to get my tight end against a mismatch on some of the smaller linebackers and let him make a play, right? It seemed like this offense was able to move a little bit more efficiently because some of the routes were designed for yards after catch. That is a noticeably missing feature in Matt Nagy's offense, where it seems like every yard is a fight for possession. Whereas what we saw against the Lions was, let's get our players in open field opportunities to pick up yards and make it easier on ourselves, right? Make it easier on the quarterback. I don't know why that hasn't really been there for Justin Fields over the past couple of weeks. It's something that a lot of fans have been complaining about. Our yards after catch compared against the league are noticeably lower. But again, I'm going to have to look back at some of the advanced stats there. But I feel like that was definitely noticeable against the Lions.
It really was noticeable. And what's interesting about this offensive system that Matt Nagy's tried to install over the last 4 years is that it's a scheme and it's a system. I think people have to understand that's predicated so much on yards after the catch. All you have to do is go back and look at the 2019 and the 2020 Chiefs. And the reason I bring those two teams up is because those two teams, the 2019 and 2020 Chiefs, were kind of at the pinnacle of what this offense can be like. That's when this offensive system was at its best, this West Coast spread offense. So those two teams, how many times did Patrick Mahomes merely just get the ball to Travis Kelce and especially Tyreek Hill in space and say, hey, you guys do the rest of the work? Too many times to count, I should say. And so ultimately the Bears aren't really doing that. They're not getting these guys like Damiere Byrd, Darnell Mooney, Marquise Goodwin, the ball in space and letting them make any sort of play. And before anyone kind of takes my comment in the wrong context here, I will say this, is that when these guys are in space, take like a Cole Kmet, for example, even if it's a 5-yard out route or a quick route or quick flat route, what happens is he's seen trucking over cornerbacks and smaller defensive backs and boom, trying to make a play. So really, this is just a case of not utilizing your talent correctly. Mooney, when he gets the ball in space, what is he doing? Well, all of a sudden, he's burning people. Same thing with Marquise Goodwin. The last time Marquise Goodwin was really productive was 2017 or 18 with the 49ers. And what had happened is you could see every time he got the ball in space, boom, he took off and it was so noticeable to see. But speaking of Cole Kmet, I mean, what's interesting about the Bears 2020 draft class is that there's no first round pick. You have 2 2s, you have a 5th, and then you have Travis Gibson as well. All these guys have kind of burst onto the scene. But I think in particular, this game showed me that Darnell Mooney, Cole Kmet, Jalen Johnson are without a doubt building blocks for the future. Now, this is something we already knew, but if you want to talk about the impact that these guys had in this game, it was more noticeable than anything. And at the end of the day, if you were to list 3 reasons as to why the Bears won, it would be Darnell Mooney, Cole Kmet, Jalen Johnson.
Yeah, I mean, if you just look at the quick stats, right? Darnell Mooney, 5 receptions for 123 yards, 24.6 average per catch. Cole Kmet, 8 receptions for 65 yards, 8.1 average, right? Those are solid numbers for guys that are anticipated to be that next step for this offense as we progress with Justin Fields' career. And these are guys that Justin has already started building a relationship with. We've seen, there's been a couple of instances where the ball's just been too far for Cole, or there's been some weird communication mishaps between Cole and Justin. But Cole Kmet is a target that Justin Fields has consistently targeted week in and week out. And we already know that Darnell Mooney and Justin's connection is legit and will only get better. So you're completely right. And Jalen Johnson, when you know a cornerback is good in the NFL, you're not really going to hear their name called a lot. Why? Because offenses aren't going to pass towards them. It's just a good thing if you're sitting there and you're going, wow, I'm seeing Artie Burns' jersey a lot. I'm wondering why. Well, it's because the offense knows that he's not as good as the guy on the other side of the field, a.k.a. Jalen Johnson. So it's never a bad thing when you don't hear a cornerback's name a good amount of time during the football game. It's usually a bad thing if you do. So you're completely right. These guys, and even some of the other younger guys, like rookies like Larry Borum, had a pretty okay game. It wasn't his best. He looked a little lost out there at times, but it could have been a lot worse. And Travis Gibson, you're completely right. He, again, is still stepping in. He's not living up to that performance that maybe we thought he would, but 2 tackles on the day. And he's still providing that opportunity for Robert Quinn to get back there and make plays. And again, he has another sack, so he's having a fantastic season, which is great. I guess the injuries are over, and Ryan Pace is looking like a genius now. Good for him. But no, the young guys are definitely a selling point for the future of this team, for fans to keep us excited, especially when we see the connections between Justin Fields. And, what this team is missing outside of Allen Robinson and when he's gone is a true possession wide receiver number one. Darnell Mooney has proven to be the yards after catch guy. I think that's fantastic, but he's not your wide receiver one, which is the big body possession, typical wide receiver that you think of when you think of who am I going to get the ball to, 4th and goal. I need somebody to come down with the catch, right? Darnell Mooney has had a little bit of inconsistency this season, which is something we didn't see last season, which is an interesting development. But Darnell Mooney's yards after catch are still something that defenses have to prepare for if only the offense took advantage of that. But moving forward, these are guys that Ryan Pace are going to use to justify why he should stay with this organization. Because again, there's a solid group of classes that Ryan Pace has put together since he's become general manager of the Chicago Bears that's kind of kept him in argument of why we should keep him as general manager. My thing, and I'll let you jump into this real quick, is this shows his ability to understand personnel. Ryan Pace is a really good judge of talent and a really good judge of personnel. And general manager, one of your key aspects is building a roster, right? Is understanding personnel and talent. Now, there are some rumors about him being transitioned to a more player side role. What's going on there? What do you know?
Look, Ryan Pace is. Let me start with this. Ryan Pace is without a doubt interesting because when you look at him, a lot of people are going to say, well, he's been here 7 seasons. He's had 1 winning season. He's made the playoffs just 1 time. People kind of tend to forget that the first 3 years of the Ryan Pace era shouldn't even really count because that roster had bits and pieces left over from the Mark Trestman as well as the Lovie Smith days. And the whole goal was you need to rebuild this thing back up. So by the time the Bears even had a sustainable foundation of talent was the 2018 season. It just so happened that trading for Khalil Mack kind of put the Bears over the edge. And that was a 1-year wonder of a team. And then in 2019 and 2020, you saw the offensive regression. You saw kind of the Bears take a big step back going into a season in 2019 where we thought everyone was going to take a step forward. Now you fast forward to 2021. And it's interesting because when a franchise quarterback fails, and again, Mitch Trubisky was at one point the future of the Bears franchise. When a team fails and strikes out on a franchise quarterback, that threatens to basically set a team back 5 seasons. Look at the Jaguars. I mean, they missed out on Chad Henne. They missed out on Blake Bortles. What happened all of a sudden? They paid for it until 2021 when Trevor Lawrence fell in their lap. Now, the reason I bring that up is because Pace and the Bears got lucky with Justin Fields falling all the way to 11, and then Dave Gettleman being dumb enough to kind of let the Bears trade up for Justin Fields and basically double down and justify why Daniel Jones is probably not even going to be in New York next year. Side note, I think the Giants need to go out and hire Brian Daboll and create a little Mitch Trubisky, Daniel Jones quarterback competition because Mitch Trubisky would probably blow Daniel Jones out of the water with all those weapons that are there. Don't let Alex and Anthony hear that. But getting back to Ryan Pace, his future with the Bears is interesting because you're talking about a guy that you could bring in as and promote to the president of football operations. If you've been to the new Hallis Hall, I promise you right now, beautiful facility. Lots of teams in the NFL would kind of kill to have what the Bears had at Hallis Hall. From everything I've heard, the expansion over the years, I mean, there was a point where there are only 2 or 3 practice fields and then the Walter Payton Center and then there's train tracks running in the back and there's like a mini forest preserve area, but the Bears actually had to get permission from the city of Lake Forest to be even able to tear that forest preserve down to create 2 additional practice fields. So the point is that Pace has modernized the Bears football operations, whereas before this team was still seemingly stuck in the dinosaur era of football operations. And he's kind of brought as a young, energetic, enthusiastic, passionate general manager because let's be real, that man's energy is contagious. He's brought a new, fresh approach to an organization that was just seemingly had a gray cloud over it all the time. So I think what's going to happen in 2022 is that the Bears are going to take a hard look at Ryan Pace and say, you know what? You've been good as a general manager. But at the end of the day, we want to give you more power than a typical general manager. And we're going to promote you to president of football operations. That means you can sit in the meetings and you can go ahead and you can kind of give your input on scouting. You can go to pro days, you can scout, you can do whatever. You can be all over the football side of things, but you're not going to be the guy making the final decisions because we've given you 7 seasons to do that. And ultimately, at the end of the day, there's been good decisions like Khalil Mack, but there's also been bad decisions like questionable trade ups in the NFL draft outside of Mitch Trubisky. And so ultimately, when you look at Pace's future, I'm going to say this. I don't think Matt Nagy's going to be here. I think Ryan Pace is going to be here. Now, the big question then stems from if you do keep Ryan Pace, what's his role? What capacity is he in? And then number 2, is he the guy picking the third head coach? And if he's not the guy picking the third head coach, who's the general manager that you're going to bring in place? And if you're George McCaskey and Ted Phillips, are you going to allow Ryan Pace to have any say or input in who the next head coach is, as
Right.
well as general manager?
Yeah, I mean, those are really good questions. The last thing you want going into this offseason with a good amount of teams who could potentially be looking for trading a new head coach is to be at the last of that list because you're trying to figure out your general manager situation at the same time. It's just not conducive for a good football organization and operation. And you're completely right. I mean, like, look, it's really hard to sit here and argue that Ryan Pace isn't a football guy, right? It's a hard argument to make. It's really easy to look at, we're going to bring up Dave Gettleman because he made that trade, right? It's really easy to look at Dave Gettleman and Ryan Pace and go, which one of these guys is a better football guy? Well, it's Ryan Pace, right? He's been able to build consistent rosters that have gotten the Bears to 500 and 2 playoffs, 2 seasons. And it's a good roster. It's a good team. But his biggest flaw, or his 2 biggest flaws, are Mitch Trubisky and Matt Nagy, right? Which are probably going to haunt him for the rest of his career because he's never going to be able to shake that. But I completely agree. It makes zero sense for me to argue that, we should throw Ryan Pace away because, it's been 7 seasons and look, we don't have a Super Bowl ring. Absolutely justifiable argument. But I don't think that if this man is gone from the Bears organization in a second, he's going to get scooped up by someone else. And I think people need to understand that. He's got a lot of respect around the league. He's a really smart guy. He's a great personnel and scout. Put him as the head football guy in the Bears organization. Get somebody to make some of the more savvy business ideas at general manager, some better trades, better guy at wheeling and dealing, and let Ryan kind of look at the football side of everything and say, okay, what can I do to make sure that this team is modernized, streamlined, and gets the best players as possible. So that's that for Ryan Pace, I guess. There's going to be conversations going on for the rest of the season and into the offseason on whether or not he should be fired or not. And I think it's very clear that our position here is he should stay. Whether it's general manager in my position, I think I'm totally fine with him staying a general manager, or if it's, president of football operations, or if it's director of player personnel or whatever. Obviously, it would be a demotion. But I think he still needs to stay in this organization at any position possible, because he is just a smart guy and he knows football. It's just that simple. And I think this Bears organization really needs more guys who just clear out energy, know football, and are willing to make some big moves and are willing to make put the organization in front of them instead of putting their ego in front of the organization.
Well, and I want to clarify something right now. When you say no football, we mean this. He has to know the X's and O's. It's also the coach's job to know the X's and O's, but also as a general manager, you need to know about the numbers too, and you need to look into things like analytics. And so with Ryan Pace, you're looking at it's like this. It's like a double-edged sword right now, because so many people say, well, he should be fired, and there's a legitimate reasoning for that. But then at the end of the day, we also have to keep something in mind, is that what the Bears do, because history sometimes repeats itself, right? Is that the Bears went ahead and they fired Lovie Smith as well as Jerry Angelo, and then they brought in Phil Emery and Mark Trustman, albeit both hirings and firings were a couple of years apart. Now, the reason I bring that up ultimately is because at the end of the day, it doesn't mean that the next guy is going to be better. And there's legitimately some Bears fans on Twitter right now that are looking at Lovie Smith's no-name defense and basically saying, oh my God, look at Lovie Smith. Look at how great he is. He's still able to coach. Well, Yeah, that's true. And that Texans defense is looking pretty good under Lovie Smith, but ultimately the Bears need to move forward here, not backwards. Okay. And so the next guy isn't always going to be better. I mean, for all we know, the Bears could turn once again to Ernie Accorsi and basically say, yeah, you know what? We recommend, and Ernie's telling his best friend, the McCaskies, oh, yeah, guess what? I recommend my best friend Dave Gettleman for this job. That's something that could ultimately happen. And so I know Max is kind of grinning, but to wrap this whole thing up here, guys, before Max goes ahead, just don't fire Pace without having a foolproof place in plan, because it doesn't mean the next guy's always going to be better. And the Bears are big indications of that.
Yeah, no, 100%. I think the number one priority for this team needs to be head coach. Figure it out now. We can put out a video with some of the reported names on the list, short list, guys that we would like to see. I think that'd be a good idea. But going onto this offseason without a head coach and without a GM at the same time, it's kind of a bad idea. I think if the Bears are looking to replace Ryan Pace, they do it next year. Let's get our head coach. Let's get our coaching room situation. Let's get our new offensive coordinator. Let's get some new special teams coach. Let's get some new wide receiver coach. Let's completely revamp the X's and O's sides of this organization and allow Ryan Pace to maybe transition into a different operational position and maybe start looking for a new GM if that's what this team needs. But it's very clear to begin that this team has a nagging issue, and it's Matt Nagy and that coaching staff. So before that issue is taken care of, I don't even think we should be looking at Ryan Pace for at least another year.
Yep, and you know what? More head coach GM replacements and talk throughout the month of December and well into January, both here and on our weekly show. We're probably going to start up a cool series for that too. But anyways, guys, we're going to get out of this thing. So make sure you're following us on Twitter, YouTube, Facebook, TikTok, and Instagram at Fireside Bears. Make sure you're following myself and Max on Twitter at Usayd Koshan, at Max Smith ESM. We'll be back on Thursday possibly to go ahead and preview Bears Cardinals, because I know Cliff Kingsbury is in his office already preparing for the Cardinals Bears game. So that's going to be an interesting one. But until then, ladies and gentlemen, bear down, stay safe, stay warm, and peace out. We'll see you guys next week.